Jeff was my best friend in school, my teens and early 20s. We felt in our element when we selected the girls, acting as a well-coordinated team and achieving considerable success. On the dance floor, we were the perfect combination for breaking up girls dancing together, and in other situations, we were a polished duo with flirting lines. We considered ourselves two musketeers. Jeff was 2 inches taller than me and a slightly heavier build. He had black wavy hair and rather piercing blue eyes. He always seemed luckier with prettier girls, maybe because he was a little more assertive, but my big win was with Shelley. In the beginning, she was just one of a couple of girls we met on the dance floor, but I grabbed onto her and ended up getting married while he dumped his girlfriend after a few weeks. Since then, he has had a succession of partners with whom he lived, but none of them lasted more than a couple of years. Our friendship continued throughout this time, and Shelley and I enjoyed countless pleasant evenings with Jeff and his current girlfriend. In my opinion, Shelley is simply delightful, and she has every reason to be a little smug, but it is her complete lack of vanity that is a large part of her appeal. She's a good girl, and I mean that in a caring, kind way, not in a morally preaky way. The night we first met, Jeff ended up in bed with his girlfriend, and I didn't. Honestly, I thought Shelley was too nice, so I didn't even try. Many years later, now in the safety of marriage, I asked if I would have been lucky if I had tried to seduce her that first night. Without hesitation, Shelley answered, "Yes," explaining, "I always thought that if I was going to put a guy in my pants on the second or third date, why not do it on the first? As you know, I really love sex. I never tried to hide the fact that I had a lot of experience, but so did you." Even in retrospect, I was kicking myself for missing out on that opportunity when Shelley added, "Really, it was yours." Gallantry that night made me think for the first time that you might be a good long-term prospect. Shelley is 5'5", 5 inches shorter than me, but her heels bring her to the perfect height. Her breasts are neither small nor too big, and her butt is nicely rounded, but her legs are by far her best feature, and they are truly stunning. I've already mentioned that what attracts me the most is her kind nature, but her love for sex is a very close second. I have always had a high sexual temperament, but her desire is even greater than mine. Although I never spoke, there were times when I almost declared a headache. We had sex regularly on at least 5 days out of 7, and many times, especially on weekends, we played the two-spin game more than once in a day. Although we were both fairly intelligent people, my friend Jeff and I became so caught up in chasing girls that our studies took a back seat, and as a result, we didn't score enough to get into the universities we wanted to. Instead, I became an electrician and later acquired some expertise and knowledge in the field of heating and ventilation. The latter offered a better-paying career, and my hopes were directed in that direction. But when I got a good job at university as an electrician, my fate was sealed. Jeff became a builder without mastery in one trade, but became competent in everything from plastering, carpentry, bricklaying to plumbing. It's ironic that the only thing he hasn't mastered is electricity. Early in our marriage, when I was well paid and Shelley was making a good salary at the insurance company, we maximized our risk by buying a nice house with the highest possible mortgage, and a couple of years later, when our situation improved due to salary increases, we compounded their mistake by extending their mortgage to pay for the extension. We even spent our free money on a very expensive luxury second honeymoon. We returned from that vacation discussing the possibility of starting a family, but almost immediately the subprime crisis began and escalated into a financial crisis that still affects much of the world. Shelley's company found itself in the eye of the storm, and she immediately lost her job and could only find poorly paid waitressing or temporary work. Overtime had always been available at the university, but it had now ceased, and I was informed that although my position was secure, any work outside office hours had to be done without pay. After 5 years of marriage, we found ourselves in a desperate situation because, although we could somehow cover the huge mortgage, we had absolutely no money left for food or heating. Selling was not an option because our negative equity had reached nightmare proportions. I once confided in my boss about my problems when I couldn't negotiate a salary increase. A few days later, he called me and said, "I think I have a solution to all your problems, but you may not like it because you will have to leave home for a year." He was right. The thought didn't appeal to me one bit, but my position meant I couldn't refuse the offer outright. "How much do they pay?" I asked when my mercantile instinct took over. "Triple your current salary, and since you will be working outside the country, most of this amount will be tax-free." It changed my perspective because I immediately realized what a huge impact that amount of money would have on our lives. Where should I go? My boss laughed dryly. "You will spend a year in Antarctica at the Halley Research Station, located 15 kilometers off the coast on the Brunt Shelf. You will be there throughout the long 10-month winter period, when temperatures can drop to minus 55 degrees Celsius and the sun does not rise above the horizon for 105 days. During this period, there will be complete isolation. No one will be able to come or leave." How about a connection to home? Not good. There is a broadband connection for email and faxes, but there is only one channel, and it has to be shared between the 16 employees working during the winter. The speed is only a quarter of a normal home connection, so that means no downloading or uploading at all. In addition, communications may be completely disrupted for long periods due to weather conditions or solar phenomena. I laughed dryly. "You're not making that offer look attractive." "I do this on purpose. I researched all of this before I mentioned it to you because I wanted you to know exactly what you're up against. Honestly, I wouldn't want to do this myself, but even if I did, I'm not the one they're looking for. But that's who I am. They need an electrician, but your HVAC training is key. As you can imagine, these skills are vital in this environment, and if something happened to the main guy and there was an emergency, they would be in serious trouble. Unless there is someone with dual skills to take over his duties." "Can I think about it?" I asked. To be honest, I was just trying to make it seem like I was considering the offer rather than rejecting it outright. While he was talking, I tried to imagine a whole year apart from Shelley, and the thought was unbearable. "Of course you can think about it. I understand that you will need to discuss this with your wife," he said sensibly. "As a small bonus, I can tell you that you don't have to stay there for the full year. If you want, you can leave on the first ship that arrives with supplies in the summer. That will be when the summer influx of people begins, and you won't be like that anymore. If you leave early, your salary won't be affected, but by then you might want to stay. I've heard that the views there are spectacular during the 2-month summer, with lots of places to visit and see." When I got home, I waited until we had dinner and then asked Shelley, "How long can you go without sex?" "A week at most," she answered automatically, and then added, "Perhaps longer if it's important for some reason." "What about a whole year?" "No way. What if it means saving our house? We will lose it unless some miracle happens." Shelley initially took it as a playful conversation about sex, but now she became very serious. "What happened? Ever since you were denied the promotion, I've been worried sick. I was offered the opportunity to work abroad for a year with triple the salary. The problem is that it is in Antarctica. I will be completely isolated most of the time, and the connection will be very poor. One very slow internet connection will be shared between 16 employees." I could almost see the numbers starting to spin in my wife's eyes as she figured out how much it was in money. "How many of these 15 will be women?" she asked. "I wouldn't want you locked away for a year with a bunch of horny women. They'll probably all be male, 2 female at most, and they'll likely be much older." "How can you last a whole year without sex?" Shelley asked, returning my original question. "When I get there, I won't have a choice," I said regretfully, "unless I'm having an affair with a man." I could say this with confidence because Shelley knew my attitude towards this. "I don't think we have a choice. It won't be easy, but we love each other enough to get through it," my wife said. We then discussed this endlessly before my February departure, but it was this short conversation that decided further events. When I told Jeff my plan, he shook his head in amazement and said, "You're better than me, Gunga Din. Just imagining what's waiting for you makes me sick. I explained about the fantastic salary and our mortgage woes, pointing out that even if we lost the house, it wouldn't end there because the remaining debt would leave us in debt for years. I understand better why you're going, but I still don't think I could do it, he replied. I'd probably rather rob a bank. In late January, as my departure date loomed ever closer, I took a break from Shelley and I's wild sex routine to spend an evening with Jeff. I specifically arranged this because I needed to talk to a friend alone. I want you to look after Shelley while I'm gone, I said, starting the conversation. That goes without saying. I would have done it automatically, even if you hadn't asked, he answered sincerely. Did you want something specific? I don't like the idea of her being all alone, so if you take her out every now and then it will help, like for a drink or a movie. It will be a pleasure, not a duty. The most important thing is that I would like you to do all the hard and dirty work around the house, all the things that I would do if I was at home. Your wish is my law, Jeff said with a grin, but then his face turned serious and he added, I'm just glad you can go there with peace of mind, knowing that your beautiful wife is in good hands. That's all. I saw him one more time before leaving to say goodbye, but I think he deliberately stayed away the rest of the time to give Shelley and I time to fully focus on each other. We took advantage of this and spent every available minute in bed for the last month, deliberately trying to make up for a whole year of love in a few weeks. As I boarded the train that last day, we hugged each other and swore eternal love before parting. 10 more people were waiting for us in Bryce Norton, and we were supposed to meet the rest of the staff for the winter period in Stanley, where they had arrived by other routes. We then flew non-stop on a TriStar to the Falkland Islands, with a refueling stop at Ascension Island. There was little communication during the flight. I think everyone was too caught up in their own thoughts, and I was certainly not in the mood to talk. After a couple of days of rest, we were taken to the edge of the shelf by ship, and then to the base, a distance of about 15 kilometers, on snowmobiles pulling a sled with a load. Upon arrival, we all circled around, looking in some awe at what would be our home for the next year. There were 3 buildings in total, and I heard that the residential block weighed 50 tons. It was installed on stilts. I read that this was the 5th version of the research station. The previous buildings stood at ground level, but with annual snowfall averaging 1.5 meters, ice accumulation eventually destroyed them. It was reassuring to know that this prototype was being brought up regularly to prevent this from happening again. The temperature that day was a couple of degrees below zero, but it didn't feel particularly cold. Of the 16 people locked together for the next 10 months, 3 were women. The only scientist among them was a lady who looked to be in her 50s. With short hair, a strong, fat woman with a serious, unsmiling face, she gave the impression of either a gay woman or completely asexual. She was studying the effects of long-term isolation, I think in the context of future settlements on the Moon or even Mars. The other 2 were kitchen assistants, and both were unusually attractive women. Sue was married to Rob, one of 3 electronics technicians who became my best friend for the winter. The third girl was Mimi, and she was something special. She was short, no more than 5'2", with masses of curly brown hair and dark, sparkling eyes. A beam of energy, she instantly attracted attention. Her breasts were slightly large for her small frame, but her buttocks were her real decoration, so to speak. I think the term bubble butt is usually used to describe her type of ass, but it doesn't really capture the phenomenalism that Mimi had. As she walked away, her magnificent bulging buttocks moved independently of each other, and this was enhanced by the sensual, form-fitting nature of the soft ski pants, which always made me salivate involuntarily. Her attractiveness did not go unnoticed, and she soon gained several admirers. From the very first days, I began to spend my free time in the company of Rob in the common room, and at first Sue joined us. In her figure, appearance, and even character, she very much reminded me of my wife, and it seemed to me that being in her company made me miss home less. Rob was also very similar to me, and I think that was the reason we hit it off immediately from the moment we first met. Although in many ways they were a mirror couple to Shelley and I had a feeling that something was wrong between them, as if there was some internal conflict lurking beneath the surface affection, but it was several weeks before I found out what it was. Case, although time soon became relatively meaningless due to the almost constant darkness, mealtimes, if nothing else, kept us on a relatively normal schedule, with most work done between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. This meant that the computer was accessed for 8 hours between now and midnight. Since 16 people had to share one computer, each was allocated half an hour a day. At first, there was a lot to talk about in the letters home. I described my new life, and my wife told me how she was coping with my absence. But soon, when everything became monotonous, there was nothing to say. We switched to love confessions and filling letters with conversations about our unsatisfied desires, but soon realized that this only made us worse. At first, Shelley talked a lot about Jeff and how much he helped, but then his name began to appear less often and then disappeared completely. I was pretty busy the first couple of months checking electrical circuits and making repairs. This turned out to be a blessing disguised as a disaster because I had little time for sadness, and I usually fell asleep so tired that sleep came easily. It wasn't until life became more settled that the pain of separation became acute, and I constantly worried about how my wife was coping at home. I liked to stay late in the common room to keep my mind occupied because I knew that alone in bed my thoughts would be filled with Shelley and the awareness of my state of deprivation. One day, there were only 4 people left in the room when Mimi sat down next to me. "I like you," she declared. "You don't talk much, but your eyes are very expressive." Not knowing how to respond, I simply smiled, to which Mimi replied, "And I think you like me too. I noticed how you look at me all the time." "Sorry, I didn't mean to," I muttered, but my apology was met with a wide smile. "Don't worry, I love being looked at. I would think I was losing my charm if men didn't pay attention to me. Which part of me do you like to look at the most, my breasts or my butt?" "On your ass," I answered enthusiastically without thinking. "Thank you, kind sir," Mimi said with a big smile. "This is the correct answer, and it gives you the right to become a member of my fan club. Right now, I have a vacancy." I was almost sure what she was suggesting, but I still needed to clarify. "What exactly does this fan club mean?" She laughed. "Come on, you should have noticed my little group of fans. If you become a member of the club, I will make sure that you get a lot of what you are missing right now, just like the rest." My heart began to race as the image of Mimi's naked body flashed before my eyes. If I could speak quickly, I would have jumped at the chance, but suddenly my tongue became thick and clumsy. Before I could say a word, this lewd image was replaced by a picture of Shelley's trusting face. Instead of agreeing, I said, "I'd love to join the club, but I'm married." Mimi looked at me in surprise. "Well, you're a rare specimen. Most of the men I like are married, but luckily for most of them, it doesn't matter." "How many men are there in the club?" "You'd be 6th. I try to limit myself to 6 because even a girl like me needs a day off." Mimi paused and then laughed. "It was a joke. I'm quite capable of serving 2 or more of my fans in one day." "What happened to the former number 6 that fell out of favor?" "He started to get possessive, which is a cardinal sin, so I sentenced him to a dry spell. Don't worry, I'll take him back when he learns." I was stunned. Moreover, I already bitterly regretted that I had refused the offered vacancy. Mimi seemed to sense my hesitation. "You can become an associate member. There are plenty of other things we could do to relieve the stress you're feeling." I was confused, my thoughts racing rapidly between alternatives. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Mimi." But before I could continue, she interrupted me. "Actually, that's not my real name. My name is Sharon, but now it seems a little simple, and I decided that Mimi better reflects my bubbly, sexy personality." "Why are you here in Antarctica? This doesn't look like your scene at all," I asked. I wasn't particularly interested, but I desperately wanted to change the subject away from her offer to become an associate member. "I love sex, I can't get enough of it, and I like variety. I live in a small town and had pretty much exhausted all my options, so I was looking for new horizons when I saw an advert for a job here. Up to 15 horny men locked together with no way to leave for 10 months of the year. I thought it would be like shooting fish in a barrel, and I'm glad to say that's exactly what it turned out to be. The only problem was sneaking out without everyone realizing what was going on. Mimi said this with a big smile on her face because we both knew she was clearly not coping with it. I got up. I enjoyed the conversation, but I knew that my resilience would begin to crumble if I was left alone with her availability any longer. I said something nice about how much I enjoyed our conversation and started to walk away, but Mimi had the last word. There are many more months left, and you are sure to become even more desperate than you are now. When that happens, a proposal remains valid, even if by then I'll be having sex with the entire station. After about 5 months, I began to worry that Jeff had neglected my wife, and I mentioned my concerns to her. She replied that I was wrong because he was still as attentive. There was also a letter from him in which Jeff assured me that he was checking on Shelley's needs daily and that he had done everything I asked of him and more. Those last 2 words, and more, began to bother me. I began to worry about what they could mean, and frankly, I became paranoid. It got so bad that I mentioned it to Shelley. Her explanation made me feel like a complete fool when she said he was just doing all the repairs I told her about but never had time for. I assumed that Rob and Sue were hired as a couple and was rather upset to learn that she was hired independently. I cursed myself for not trying the same. My wife was an excellent cook and could have easily filled the position, and if she had been there to share my bed during those long months in Antarctica, a year would have turned out to be much less painful than it was. However, one day, while talking to Rob alone, I learned that I was wrong. He explained that his wife's work was given priority, and he only applied for his position when it was accepted. You see, he explained, I didn't come here for the money. My goal was to get Sue away from our home environment. The point is that she was having an affair. He said that he did not know about the affair for several months and mistook her nightly absences and even weekends away from home for work trips. Eventually, he became suspicious after noticing the usual signs and finally followed her when she met her lover. There was a confrontation during which Sue claimed that she still loved him and the affair was just a fling. She said that I no longer satisfy her sexually, although there had never been such problems before, until this scoundrel showed up, Rob said bitterly. She swore she wouldn't see him again, and I forgave her. But I soon realized she was seeing him again, Rob continued. It wasn't as bad as before, but I could tell she was still sleeping with him. Sue said she still loved me, and I believed her, but it seemed like she couldn't handle it. I think she was attracted to him. There was no point in starting a showdown again if I wanted to keep her, because I had no more threats left, so I got us a job here and told her that it would be proof of her love if she agreed to go with her. He laughed. The worst-case scenario would be if I was stuck here for a year and she stayed there, free and without any obligations. I knew there would be a job for me, but first I had to make sure she was willing to go with me. Before submitting an official application. Among the winter staff, there was one guy named Craig who I couldn't stand, even though we barely spoke to each other. I didn't like him at first sight because he was a typical loud and self-confident person, self-centered, self-righteous, and very persistent. It is not surprising that he was the first to notice Mimi. I'm not sure if he succeeded, but I suspect he did. Whether that was the case or not, he didn't remain one of Mimi's choices for very long, so it was almost inevitable that he would soon turn his attention to Sue. I was displeased to see that his advances were received favorably. I mentioned this to Rob, but he just shook his head helplessly, saying, I've been afraid of it since we got here, because he's almost a carbon copy of the bastard who stayed at Derby. This new situation continued to escalate. At first, Craig only showed attention to Sue when Rob wasn't around, but they soon began chatting openly in the family room, even when Rob was there. Similarly, at first they only tried to have privacy when Rob was away, but then they stopped pretending, and one day Craig and Sue walked right in front of her husband, holding hands, going to find a place to have sex. Throughout the year, I was constantly horny when I was around Mimi, and I think she understood this very well. In fact, I suspect she was deliberately putting herself out there for me. Also, whenever she went for secret pleasures with her next chosen one, her eyes always met mine right before she left the room. All this, coupled with the obvious sexual activity of my friend's wife, made my forced abstinence especially difficult to bear. Due to my depressed state, I perhaps empathized too much with my friend, and one day I unexpectedly said to myself that I didn't know how he could stand it. "It hurts at first, but it gets easier with time," he assured me. "I still have sex with my wife, and she always claims I'm the only one she loves, but she says Craig gives her something she needs." Midwinter's Day was the main event of the year, with a week of celebrations culminating in a great feast on the day itself. Before the meal, there was a tradition everyone ran naked around the base, weather permitting. This happened even if the temperature outside was 30 below zero. We were allowed to wear a hat, boots, gloves, and a scarf, but nothing else. This made it possible to protect the limbs from frostbite, but left one important place unprotected from the icy air. The female scientist refused to participate, declaring that she was an observer and not a participant, but both of the other women undressed happily. After dinner, the BBC Overseas Service broadcast a special program connecting us with our families. Various relatives gathered in 4 locations, each of which was covered by film crews for outside broadcasts. As Shelley approached the camera to make her entrance, I spotted Jeff among the small crowd sitting behind her, and as if sensing that I had noticed him, my friend raised his hand and waved. Seeing Shelley lifted my spirits incredibly. I expected to see her face as tense as I felt, but instead she looked radiant and content. Unlike everyone else, I only had 4 months left, but with endless days turning into endless nights, at times it felt like it would never end. I remember little of this terrible time, and if it had not been for my friendship with Rob and the joy of seeing Mimi, I might have sunk into a deep depression. I tried to avoid the topic, but when I was about a week away from returning, I asked Rob about his family situation. "It's okay," he said. "Nothing has changed, but I've probably come to terms with it. Sue still loves me very much and refuses me nothing. If it weren't for the fact that she sleeps with Craig all the time, you could say that we have a perfect marriage. You only have a couple of months left before you return, and then everything will be over," I offered as a consolation. Rob shrugged. "We're not going back to Derby, but wherever we go, I think she'll find someone else. I think that's her nature." As I was ready to leave and making my rounds saying goodbye, Mimi came up to me, stood on her tiptoes, and gave me a warm but chaste kiss on the lips before saying, "I hope your wife appreciates what she has, because you are a worthy man." At that moment, for the first and last time, I regretted not staying for the summer. It seemed like I was in for a real treat, as there were many places to see, including a large colony of emperor penguins living nearby. The research station's population is said to swell to 70 people during the summer months, most of whom are scientists, but there are also tourists among them. Usually winter staff are hired in advance, but I was hired at the last minute to fill an emergency vacancy. The reason I was able to leave early was because my replacement said he wanted to go to Antarctica for 2 summers. I instructed Shelley to wait for me at home, since my difficult return was rather unpredictable. When I opened the door of our house, she rushed into my arms and kissed me, to which I responded in kind. But almost immediately, I felt the first slight disappointment. Pulling away from her lips, I suggested we go straight to bed, but she replied, "Perhaps you would like to sit down and talk or eat something first." It was a small thing and perhaps a reasonable suggestion, but if I had said the same thing before leaving, she would have rushed into the hallway, tearing off her clothes, and would have been lying on the bed, naked, when I came to her. We made love, but then, and the subsequent times we had sex, Shelley did not seem to express the pent-up desire that I had in abundance, and her passion seemed even less than before I left. She seemed to have lost her sexual appetite. This worried me a little, but I decided I was just expecting too much. We had a lot of gentle sex, and the day before Christmas we spent time either visiting her parents, my parents, relatives and friends, or in bed. Even when we had no energy left for sex, I enjoyed lying next to Shelley, knowing that I could reach out and touch her. I wondered why Jeff didn't show up, but then I realized he was purposely staying away so as not to distract me from what he knew was my top priority. He ended up visiting on Boxing Day, and the three of us had a nice long evening. I was somewhat embarrassed by his obvious desire for memories because he constantly wanted to talk about our youthful antics and about our credo, one for all and all for one. He got sentimental at times and had a strange look on his face when he left. Unusually, Shelley didn't go to the door to kiss him goodbye, but I thought she was just upset with him for seemingly ignoring her all night. 2 days later, he returned again. I had already resigned myself to spending the evening watching TV and was excited at the prospect of socializing instead. Unfortunately, Jeff seemed depressed, even reserved. I had already gotten comfortable, leaving Shelley and Jeff to pour drinks, when I noticed him silently whispering something to her with some urgency, to which she shook her head in response, probably saying something I didn't. I heard it over the music. Almost immediately, Jeff left abruptly, and I reluctantly returned to watching TV. When my wife returned from seeing him off, she sat down next to me on the sofa, took my hand, and asked me to tell me about the women who shared the premises with me during my absence. I described all three of them much as I do here, saying that Sue was my best friend's wife, but not mentioning her extramarital affairs. As for Mimi, I told her frankly about the conversation and admitted how close I had come to cheating with her, both then and at other times when the feeling of sexual deprivation became almost unbearable. Letting go of my hand, Shelley said angrily, "You better have sex with her." I was shocked, not only by this remark, but also by the fact that she used this word. She never said it, except for certain moments in the bedroom. "Why do you say that?" "It would be easier for me if you cheated, because I was unfaithful to you," she said quietly. It was what I half expected. I was very close to cheating, so I knew how easily it could happen. I also knew that Shelley had much more potential than I did. "With whom?" I asked. "With Jeff." This really amazed me. He was the last person from whom I expected such betrayal. How often? Many times, so many that I lost count. "When did this start?" "About 3 months after you left. I thought I could go a year without sex, but even then I was going crazy with desire. I don't remember exactly how it started, but after the first time I had to do it again, and then I couldn't stop because it was the best sex of my life." "Did you spend whole nights with him?" "For some reason, it seemed important to me." Shelley nodded. "Alan, I'm not going to lie, he's been practically living here for the past few months. He even took me on holiday to Portugal for a week. He paid for everything before you even asked." "Did you use our bed?" "Yes. At first, we only did it downstairs. Then we moved to the guest bedroom. But our bed is much bigger and more comfortable, so it was stupid not to use it." "You and him had sex in our bed right before I returned?" "No, we stopped a week before your arrival, but only because I wasn't going to tell you, and we didn't want to accidentally leave behind any evidence that you might find," my wife honestly admitted. This gave me another unpleasant thought. "Did you do things with him that you never did with me?" "Yes, we did, but I would prefer not to talk about it. I'll tell you if you insist, but darling, to be honest, I don't think knowing this kind of stuff will help you." Ignoring her warning, I continued, "Tell me one thing you did to him that you didn't do to me." Shelley hesitated for a moment and then reluctantly spoke. "I only did this with him." Suddenly, I felt very cold, colder than I had ever felt in Antarctica. "Does this mean you are going to leave me for him?" "No, it's not like that," my wife passionately assured me. "You are the only man I love. I don't love Jeff, it was only sex with him." My head felt numb. Despite what she had just said, I couldn't think of a word. Shelley let the silence linger for a few minutes, but then, apparently feeling the need to completely unburden herself, she said quietly, "You really don't know me. I told you that I had quite a turbulent past, but I hid a lot of things from you, and I think if you knew the truth, it would help you understand why I acted the way I did while you were gone." Jeff wasn't really my best lover because I was once with a guy who was even better in bed than him. This is the one I never told you about when I admitted my past. I lived with him for almost a year. He drank a lot and started beating me, but I stayed with the bastard for months longer than I should have because I didn't want to miss out on the fantastic sex. It was right after I left him when I was going through a really messy period. I had a collection of regular guys and slept with different ones every night, even sometimes taking two at the same time, but then I calmed down and started enjoying regular sex again. Were her last words a blow to my heart or to my pride? "Are you saying that my lovemaking is just ordinary?" I asked sadly. Shelley was remorseful. "That's not what I meant at all. I love making love to you. I always have." This information was something I would rather not know, but I didn't let it affect the decision I came to. I was initially ready to forgive a minor transgression, and now I realize that the same logic applies to serious betrayal. The basic fact was that I couldn't bear the thought of losing her. "I forgive you," I said quickly before I could change my mind. A happy expression appeared on my wife's face, but it was not the joy and relief I expected. In fact, she still seemed very uneasy. "I still love you. What else do you want me to say?" "Can I continue to see Jeff?" "You can't be serious," I exploded. "I love you and I want to be with you, but I don't think I can give him up," Shelley said simply. "What do you mean, once a month, once every 2 months?" I asked coldly. "I was hoping for once a week," she answered honestly. "How about once every 2 weeks?" "That would be perfect," she said, her face completely lighting up. "You must think I'm crazy," I told her angrily. "I don't want to see that damn bastard Jeff anymore, and if I find out you were dating him after this, it's over between us." "I could say nothing and continue seeing him without telling you," my wife said wisely. "I know I could, and I don't know why I didn't do it." Looking sincerely into my eyes, Shelley said, "We were going to, but I'm terribly ashamed of what I did, and I decided that I couldn't keep it a secret any longer. I love you with all my heart, and I want to be with you, but Jeff has me. It's like an addiction, and I can't trust myself to stay away from him. I can't bear the thought of cheating on you again, but I was hoping you would let me have sex with him one more time." I knew she was telling the truth, and it made me realize that things weren't as simple as I thought. I was overcome with confusion. "I can't talk about this now. I need to think it over thoroughly, and my mind is not working at all at the moment," I told her. "I'll give you an answer in a day or two, but I have absolutely no idea what it will be." With these words, I stood up and left the room. That night, I slept in the spare room. The next day, we were polite to each other, but I found it unbearable to be in the house facing my wife's hopeful looks, so I left and wandered the streets most of the day. The end of December is not the best time for long walks in the fresh air, although I was somewhat hardened by the cold. The next day, I went to the university to my workplace. My boss immediately suggested that I return home. He said, "You're not expected until mid-February, so why don't you and your wife go on holiday somewhere warm? I'm sure you can afford it." I said I preferred to work and didn't need a salary, but he said my temporary replacement was on a 1-year contract and he probably wouldn't like it if I interfered. I agreed to come for a few days to communicate with the new employee and learn everything necessary before my official return. He agreed, and I went to work for the next 3 days. At home, Shelley cooked very tasty meals for me, but we walked around each other and rarely talked. During this time, reflecting on the situation, my mind constantly fluctuates first one way and then the other. The only constant was that I still loved my wife. Many different arguments flooded my mind, some in favor of allowing the novel to continue, others against. One thing I had to admit was that if Shelley was going to cheat on me anyway, I'd rather it be Jeff than some other slimy guy like Jack Mann. Even being with Jeff was better than having sex with different men, cheered on by Sylvia. A powerful argument against allowing the affair to continue was the question: what man in his right mind would agree to share his wife with the man she preferred in bed? On the other hand, Jeff and I had shared women before, never as a threesome for some reason, but they weren't women we had any real feelings for. But I always knew that Jeff was superior to me sexually, and this fact never bothered me. I knew that I had my own advantages that he did not have. Knowing that Rob had already walked this path before me, I figured that his experience would be invaluable in making the decision. He said both of his wife's known infidelities hurt him, but in some ways the one in the southern hemisphere was the most painful. In Derby, the affair was discreet, but in the close quarters of our flats, everyone knew what was going on, and for him it was extremely humiliating. His last words to me were that he could now live with it, believing that her behavior was caused by a flaw in Sue's character and not by his own flaws. In comparative analysis, I had one big advantage over Rob. I had a lot of control over whether Shelley would continue to cheat on me, whereas he was completely at the mercy of his wife's whims. There was one big question that I couldn't answer. If Shelley never had sex with anyone but me again, would I be able to enjoy a truly happy life, knowing that she was living with an unfulfilled craving? On the other hand, can I be sure that they will not continue dating, and if not, will I be forced to live with suspicion? At the end of my mental marathon, these two arguments were supreme in my mind. On the third night, when I returned home, Shelley tearfully announced, "Jeff wants to talk to you. He wants you to come to his house after dinner." Was he here? No, he called me on my mobile. Why didn't that bastard come here? Does he know where I am? He's feeling really bad about what happened right now, and I think he'd rather meet you on his own turf. No wonder, I said, but no more words were spoken before I was at the door of his apartment. Hearing, "Come in," I pushed the door and entered. It led straight into the living room, and Jeff stood across from me, about 10 feet away. Whether by chance or design, he was wearing only a shirt and sweatpants and had no shoes on his feet, making us practically the same height. "Come and punch me in the face," he suggested. "I won't dodge or fight back, so apply a good hit because I deserved it." "You're an insufferable bastard, complete crap," I told him. Jeff cowered under the verbal spanking, but did not respond. "I'm not going to get my hands dirty by hitting you. I just want to know why," I said calmly. "I considered you a brother." Brothers are even more notorious for such betrayals than best friends. "So you admit that it was a betrayal?" "Absolutely, but that was not my intention from the beginning. Honestly, I thought I had your best interests at heart." "Did you think you were acting in my best interests by having sex with my wife?" I repeated in disbelief. "Please explain." "It's quite a long story, so can I get you a drink, a beer, or a whiskey?" "I think I need something, but better pour a beer. I'm driving," I said, walking forward and sitting down in a chair without an invitation. When we both had bottles in hand, Jeff began. "At first I was a good friend, doing everything you asked, and spending a lot of time with Shelley, talking about everything. The only topic that was never brought up was sex, and how much she missed you in that regard. However, after a few months I was able to recognize my growing sexual hunger. It's in the eyes. Both you and I know the signs. What was even more alarming was the way she kept throwing glances at me." Jeff paused to light a cigarette. "She said she misses it even more than she expected." At this point, my ex-friend became noticeably nervous, and I realized that things were getting closer to the sexual part. Then, on one visit on Saturday afternoon, Shelley was very excited and told me she was going to the club that evening with Sylvia. Well, Sylvia is a real little woman of easy virtue, and I knew that she was just waiting for the opportunity to lead your wife astray. This made me worried, so I found out the name of the club they were going to and went to the same place that night to keep an eye on them. They came late, and at first I was afraid that they had gone somewhere else, but when they finally showed up, I barely recognized your wife. Until now, I had been silent, but now I had to ask what had changed in her. For starters, she was dressed in very revealing clothes that I had never seen on her before. I suspect they were things taken from Sylvia, and besides, it was obvious that she had already had a fair amount of alcohol. When they hit the dance floor, every man in this place immediately knew that she was ready for anything. Within seconds, they were surrounding her like flies, with Jack Man leading the pack. With their legs almost completely exposed, who could blame them? Do you remember Jack Man? He called himself the man, and with good reason, because the bastard was a magnet for women. The problem is that this guy is a real creep, and every one of his victims ended up feeling used when he abandoned them. You'd think a reputation like that would spread quickly, but that didn't stop the stream of stupid women trying to fall into his clutches. At this point, Jeff needed another drink, but this time he skipped the beer and poured a generous amount of whiskey into his glass. He raised the bottle to me, but I refused. Continuing, Jeff said, "Soon Jack had all the other contenders removed, and he and Shelley started dancing dirty. Everything was going the same way, and I couldn't bear the thought of Jack's dirty hands on her. So I stepped in, grabbed Shelley's hand, and told her I was taking her out of there. Jack was clearly not happy, but he knew who I was and backed off. I put her in a taxi and took her home." "What happened next?" I asked. I didn't mean to speak, but the words came out of my mouth. I laid her down on the sofa and then went to make us some coffee, but when I returned with the mugs, she had either fallen asleep or was unconscious. I put the mugs on the floor and put my hand on hers, hoping to wake her up. At this moment, Shelley opened her eyes. She extended her hands to me and said, "Please, Alan, I'm only human." It was pretty obvious that she was going to have sex with someone before you got back, so I convinced myself that I was better than Jack Mann or any of the other horny bastards that were there. I knew it wouldn't be an isolated incident because she would need a top-up before Christmas. I thought it could happen up to half a dozen times at most, but it didn't turn out that way, and I'm sorry. "You're a damn selfish pig. Just the sight of you disgusts me," I told him angrily. "Just saying, 'I'm sorry' is not enough. I don't understand how I could consider you a decent guy for so long." "I have no excuses," he said. "I don't blame myself for the first time, because I would have needed to be a man with an iron will to resist, and I could even justify it a few more times, but what I continued was completely wrong. What makes it even worse is that I started to enjoy the wrongness of having sex with your wife almost every night and really enjoying the fact that you were stuck on the other side of the world and had no idea. If you knew it was so wrong, why didn't you stop? I'm sure you had better instincts before. It was only after your return that I fully realized this. Before I didn't try to imagine myself in your place, and now I'm disgusted with myself. It's been less than 3 weeks since we stopped, and I'm already going crazy, so I'll never know how you managed to stay sane for so many months." I could understand how it all happened. However, I couldn't think of anything to say because my mind was too filled with images to formulate words. After a few minutes of silence, Jeff said, "The irony is that, if not for a quirk of fate, our roles could have been reversed. I could have been sitting in your place, and you could have been sitting in mine." "Why the hell did you decide that?" I asked sharply, feeling a new surge of anger. "Remember when we picked up Shelley and Claire that first night? Shelley was the one I liked, mostly because of her legs, and as the four of us danced languidly together, she and I seemed to click. I thought the pairings were already decided, but when I returned from the bar with drinks, you were already sitting with Shelley. If you went for drinks, it would be the other way around. At the time, I thought it would be a one-night stand, a couple of weeks at most, so I decided to give you the opportunity to be with a girl this time. If I had known how everything would turn out, I would have competed with you from the very beginning." He smiled sadly. "Just imagine if I were the one who won Shelley, then I would be the one who bought the house, and you would be content with rented accommodation. It would be me with mortgage problems. I would spend a year at the bottom of the world, and I would be sitting where you are right now, deciding whether to kill me." He paused and then said, "You're the one Shelley loves. Despite what I just said, I never had any intention of trying to take her away from you, and I still don't have any. You have to believe it." It was a natural introduction to discussing Shelley's statement that she wanted to continue seeing Jeff, but I just couldn't do it. Standing up, I said, "I'm not sure I ever want to see you again, but as a sign of respect for our past friendship, I will shake your hand." Jeff immediately rushed to take advantage of this small act of generosity, and I left without another word. When I returned home, Shelley looked at me worriedly. "What happened?" "We didn't fight, if that's what you mean. He brought me a drink, and we talked. About what? We talked about you and what happened while I was gone. What exactly was said? I knew she was desperate to know if her desire to continue the relationship had been mentioned. I told him I didn't want to see him anymore, if that answers your question, I said. But I know what you want, and I'm still thinking about it, I told her. But one thing is for sure. If I agree to continue your meetings, it will take place at his home, because I definitely don't want him to appear in this house again. Expect my answer to be no, and for now you should be glad I'm not talking about divorce. With an effort, Shelley suppressed her disappointment and asked, "What else were you talking about?" I told him he was a dishonest bastard. He's not the only one to blame. I think maybe I was worse than him. He told me he actually enjoyed cheating on me behind my back, and you felt the same way? No, of course not. I was always ashamed of what I did, and I kept trying to stop it. But every time I got to the point of telling him to leave, I put it off until the next day. Eventually, I stopped even trying. I believe you, I said. The problem is that I believe him too. Shelley let my remark hang in the air for a moment, and then asked, "Was anything else said?" Jeff argued that if we had been assigned differently on that very first night, he would have been the one you would have married, and our positions would now be opposite. He's wrong, my wife said flatly. No matter what happened, I would never have married him. I admit that on that first night, I would have been glad to have stayed with him, and was a little upset when things turned out differently, but very soon I was glad that it turned out that way. Firstly, as you now know, his character cannot compare with yours. I understand perfectly why he cannot keep a girl for more than 2 years. I've always been attached to Jeff, and this past year hasn't changed anything one way or the other, but I could never love him the way I love you. He's just not as charming as you, but maybe that's why he's better in bed. Her last remark did not make me feel better, and I went to my lonely bed. The next day, I found it difficult to stay in the house, faced with Shelley's hopes, so I began to spend time in the pub. It was obvious from her exhausted face that she was torn between her love for me and her desire to be with him, and I knew that I could very easily give in, just to return the smile to her beautiful face. Last night, I noticed Jeff drinking at the bar, but I deliberately avoided him and took my drink to a table. In less than a minute, he sat down across from me, and it was obvious that he had been drinking for a while. "I don't understand why you won't agree to me sleeping with Shelley sometimes," he blurted out as soon as he sat down. "After all the sex we had this year, what difference would it make if it happened a few more times? I love her too, you know. I don't want to take it away from you, but I need to touch it sometimes. When I was in Antarctica, I didn't know what was going on, and when I came back it was already in the past. But can you imagine how I would feel, watching her go, knowing that she was going to spend the night in bed with you? It doesn't have to be all night. It doesn't matter, it's the fact itself that matters." Jeff suddenly looked almost sober as he said quietly, "I can very easily imagine how you would feel, because that's exactly what I've felt every time I've been with you too, since you got married and even before that. I was always tormented by the fact that she would end the evening lying naked next to you and not with me, and it didn't matter whether I had a girlfriend at the time or not. I've been looking for my own Shelley for years. Why do you think I can't last longer than 2 years with any woman?" I stood up and told him, "Come to our house at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening. I think I have made my decision." Jeff rang the doorbell and walked in without saying a word when I opened it. I took him into the living room and sat him down in one of the chairs. Then, after distributing the drinks I had prepared in advance, I deliberately sat down next to Shelley on the sofa opposite him. Before I could speak, Jeff said, "Please let me say this first. If you decide that you can't afford to continue to see your wife from time to time, then I will leave this area and move to some distant place. Countries or even abroad. Otherwise, I know I'll be trying to date Shelley behind your back, and I think she'll have a hard time resisting that. The only honest solution is to remove yourself completely from temptation." "I don't think I can let you do this," I said. "Your whole life is here, family, work, friends, in general, everything you know. It's too much of a sacrifice. Then what are you suggesting? I might be tempted to agree to what you both seem to want, but there's one big problem that's stopping me. I paused to look at his face before saying, before we started having financial difficulties, Shelley and I were talking about having a baby. This is what I want now because I think a baby will bring stability and new attention, but she won't be able to get off the pill if you have sex with her. With a more hopeful expression, Jeff offered, I can promise to always use protection. I shook my head. This is not enough. I have to consider the possibility that in a fit of passion or chance it might not work. Then I'll do the procedure. Just for the sake of our past friendship, I can't let you do this because you might bitterly regret such a drastic step in the future. My former friend's shoulders slumped. Then I don't know the answer, he said helplessly. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I haven't really thought about anything else for the past few days, I said. This is what I came to. You and my wife can continue to have sex, but under fairly strict conditions. I think it could take up to 6 months for Shelley to get pregnant, and you two won't be able to be together during that time. In fact, I'm going to double that because I just went through a year of hell, and I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go through the same thing. I want you both to promise that you will not date or contact each other during this time, but if you can make it through this year, then you can spend the night together every other Friday. After my small statement, there was complete silence. I think neither of them was seriously expecting my proposal, but they also understood that they would have to go through torture to get what they wanted. After a while, Jeff said, I'm just thinking about the no contact clause. You could email your wife while you were away, so you didn't feel completely disconnected. It was a fair point. I tried to be fair, and this limit did seem a bit harsh, so I relaxed it by saying, okay, no voice contacts or text messages, but you can exchange 1 email per week. Jeff thanked me and Shelley smiled in appreciation of the relief, but nothing more was said, and after a moment I said I was going upstairs for 15 minutes to give them a chance to discuss the situation in private. I gave them a good 20 minutes before I came back because I wanted them to say goodbye. I was well aware that they would have the opportunity for physical contact, but I could live with that. When I returned, they were still sitting exactly as I had left them. I noticed from Shelley's lips that they had kissed, but did not notice any irregularities in clothing. Jeff stood up with the clear intention of leaving, and I walked him to the door. Before going outside, he turned and said with forced cheerfulness, "See you in a year, I hope." Shelley couldn't find the words to express her thoughts about what had happened, but that night I think she expressed her gratitude by being especially affectionate. During that year, I probably should have been more vigilant, but I wasn't. I decided that they were both decent people who had simply found themselves in a situation that was stronger than them, and besides, I believed that they had too much at stake to risk it for a couple of short meetings. Shelley openly demonstrated her transparency, giving me her email password and even inviting me to read Jeff's letters to her. She also left her cell phone in plain sight so I could check it, but I didn't take advantage of any of those offers. In one small aspect, I made a protective gesture. My assistant at the university complained about the workload, and in the end, I was assigned an assistant. He was a retired electrician who came in for a few hours a week to supplement his pension. There was always the opportunity to compensate for unpaid overtime with additional time. Before I didn't care about this, but now I took advantage of it. I started coming home unexpectedly from time to time, sometimes picking up my wife after work at lunchtime, sometimes coming home early, and sometimes showing up in the middle of the day. My new assistant provided an excellent excuse and kept my actions from seeming suspicious. By the end of March, the pregnancy test came back positive. Shelley must have told Jeff by mail because I received a short letter from him congratulating him and telling him that he was just as excited about the baby's arrival as I was. I knew this was true because the birth of the child was predicted just a few days before the end of his year in seclusion. About a couple of weeks after that evening when I made the decision, I noticed that my wife had returned to her previous sexual desire. I knew I had to make the most of this time because it was almost certain that this desire would disappear when Jeff came back into her life. Pregnancy could also shorten this hunger period, but I realized that with the arrival of children, some aspects of early sexuality tend to disappear in most couples. Our daughter was born on Boxing Day, and we named her Denise. I wasn't at all upset that Jeff's return would deny him the immediate marathon of sex he might have been hoping for at some point. My doctor ordered me not to have sex for at least a month after birth, and there was no reason why he couldn't follow the same rules. This was something of a relief, as it allowed me to gradually get used to the fact that I would be sharing my wife. After Jeff had pre-cleared this with me by mail, he arrived at our house on the appointed day with gifts: a diamond bracelet for Shelley, a 20-year-old whiskey for me, and a stuffed animal. The initial greetings were mutual, and I watched as Jeff and Shelley embraced with such passion that it didn't really bother me anymore. I pointed out to him that although our agreement allowed him to take her home for the night, this was not possible at the moment due to her breastfeeding schedule. This same logic also ruled out anything for the entire night. I said he could spend a couple of hours alone with Shelley while I either went to the pub or, if they preferred, stayed downstairs and looked after Denise, so they didn't face any interruptions while in the bedroom. They chose the latter option, or at least that's what Shelley thought. This was my first experience of what Rob had talked about before: sitting and waiting while your wife has sex with another man. It was much less painful than I expected, but I knew it would be much worse over time when sex became possible again. When they got downstairs, Jeff was visibly agitated and wanted to leave immediately, while Shelley fell into a reverie again and couldn't meet my gaze. At the door, Jeff shook my hand and asked if we could be friends again. I told him that I didn't see any reason why not, because I really missed his friendship. When I returned, I tried to kiss Shelley, but was surprised when she resisted a little before finally giving in and returning the kiss with full feeling. Over the next few months, the situation gradually became more normal. Shelley and I gradually returned to our normal routine, and Jeff still continued to come every 2 weeks, as we had agreed. I knew that our relationship would never be the same, but perhaps this was what was necessary to save the marriage. Over the next few months, the situation gradually became more normal. Shelley and I were slowly getting back into our routine, and Jeff continued to come every 2 weeks, as we had agreed upon. I knew that our relationship would never be the same, but perhaps this was what was necessary to save our marriage. Every time Shelley went to Jeff's for the night, it hurt me. I felt jealousy squeezing me, but I tried not to show it. Knowing that I had agreed to this arrangement, I tried to suppress negative emotions, thinking that perhaps this was better than losing her completely. Every time she returned, I noticed that she became a little more withdrawn, and this hurt me even more. But I continued to convince myself that all this was for the sake of preserving our family. As Denise grew older, she began to take up more and more of our time, and this somewhat distracted me from thinking about Jeff and Shelley. I immersed myself in caring for my daughter, and it really helped me through difficult moments. Shelley and I began to enjoy our family life again, and although the memories of what happened still weighed heavily on me, I learned to live with it. A year into this arrangement, I began to notice that Shelley was mentioning Jeff less and less. I didn't ask her, but I felt that their meetings had become less important to her. One evening she came home, and without saying a word, she came up to me, hugged me tightly, and whispered that she loved me more than ever. I saw sincerity in her eyes, and it gave me hope that our lives could return to normal. A few more months passed, and Shelley herself suggested stopping meetings with Jeff. She said she realized how much she loved me and how important our family was to her. I felt a huge relief when I heard this. We decided to talk to Jeff, and although he was disappointed, he was understanding of our decision. Since then, our life has taken a new path. Of course, the past cannot be erased, and the wounds left by these events will never completely disappear, but we were both determined to build our future together. We continued to work on our relationship, and over time I began to notice that our connection only became stronger. We started planning our future again and thinking about having another child. Looking back now, I realize that this painful experience helped us both realize how important we were to each other. He forced us to face our fears and doubts, and we ultimately came out of that ordeal stronger and more loving. We are still together, and now I am sure that our love can overcome any obstacles. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.